I think, Stephen, South Africans in many ways are commendable as law-abiding citizens. I mean, it may not sound always correct when you look at our crime stats, but in the main, people are compliant. Where I think I've been a little bit concerned is the interpretation of the various laws and the abuse by law enforcement agencies. Because I think when you do that, you are asking citizens who have, in the main, been staying at home and maybe and sometimes just in their own little way, will find a way to take on the police services. So I would urge that more than anything, we need to encourage cooperation with citizens. We need to ensure that this is a partnership. The fight against corona is a totally different one. We're not dealing against an element of physical threat. We're dealing against the distribution of a disease and the spreading of a disease. And I think the rules behind that need to be managed in a totally different way. So I would urge that the partnership be better. But I think in the main, South Africans themselves have been good about this.
A lot of people have been talking about the leadership displayed by different people and in different ways, obviously with varying degrees of effectiveness. How would you rate the leadership so far shown by South Africans in leadership positions? I mean, you yourself know exactly how hard it can be to lead.
No, absolutely. It's tough. And I want to say to President Ramaphosa, I thought that his efforts have been commendable. I thought that the communication coming from government has been great. I think Willem Kiezer has done an outstanding job. And I think all of us as citizens need to realize the complexity of managing disease. I can't speak for cabinet because I think some of the messaging has been confusing at best and sometimes not helpful to citizens. What I would urge, even at this time, is that leadership must be broadened. I think more aspects of society need to come on board to be able to help in us collectively as a nation working together. So I think there's been inspiring moves by business community in terms of their contribution to the Solidarity Fund, but also to ordinary businesses where they've been, as we deal next with the humanitarian crisis of making sure South Africans get fed, making sure that all of those efforts take into place. Because I think for now, we're dealing with almost the house is on fire, so you're not left with many choices. You have to shut down borders. You have to do all of that. What's going to be difficult next is how do we rebuild South Africa when the economic crisis is upon us? What structural reforms do we put on the table? How do we ensure that we build a prosperous nation subsequent to that? And I think that's when the real test of leadership is going to be even much harder, because their choices about what do you deal with the bureaucracy, how do you deal with certain difficult choices about state-owned enterprises, how do you reform South Africa's economy? I think I think we've got to build credibility now, because I think the hard work is coming.
I mean, I was going to say, we're in politically the easy stage of the lockdown. As it goes on, more and more people are likely to get frustrated. There are going to be big concerns around business coming out of it. Are you worried that South African politics could almost return to, business as usual, where people are usually pretty rude about each other straight after the lockdown? Or do you think this moment of national unity could actually last beyond that? I imagine leadership's really important in that too.
It is going to be, I think, our most vital test. I think for now, we're trying to deal with a crisis. When the crisis averts, the rebuilding work is going to be profoundly difficult. And I think the decisions that we've delayed are going to come to the fore. Because you cannot say it's because of COVID-19 that SAA should be grounded. SAA should have been grounded a long time ago. You can't say that a way of distributing money to poor communities should have been done. It should have been done a long time ago. So all of these things are going to come to the fore. And I think our politics, as is any aspect of society, is going to enter a new normal. And what I suspect is going to happen in the process of rebuilding, we'll have some who want to make choices that say, how do we rebuild? And we'll make others who want to go back to a pre-COVID world. And I think that would be a dangerous position to take. I would urge more than anything that you find a new leadership that will build South Africa post this particular crisis, because that's going to take a different style of leadership. We're living in a world that never before you would have thought that the U.S. would be the epicenter of a pandemic. You'd be dealing with a reconfigured Europe. You'll effectively be dealing with a resurgent and dominant China. And therefore, I think our decisions within a global spectrum and how we collaborate together as Africans and Africa as a continent is going to be vital. We're heading into a continent which soon is going to have 1.2 billion people by 2040. We have to make some tough decisions now, because if we don't manage what technology does, if we don't manage what disease management does, and if we don't manage the environmental issues, I think we might face some very, very difficult days ahead.
Mmusi, I mean, there's some people who are really very pessimistic, and I completely understand this. It's a completely legitimate way to feel right now. You look at businesses that are contracting. I mean, can you imagine working as a waiter in this economy, in the post-COVID-19 economy? I mean, what's going to happen to restaurants that have been shut for almost a month, or things like that? And then you have other people who will say, well, look, if you go and you look at what's going to happen in 10 years as a result of all of this, society is going to change radically. There's going to be a lot more resources for distance learning, for example. Where do you fall in this? I mean, are you falling with the pessimists or the optimists or somewhere in the middle?
No, I think my response is a leadership one. This is a great opportunity. We've had too many outstanding conversations that we should have been having. So I think this is a leadership moment. I think we've got to rethink how we educate people. We cannot for much longer delay our conversation about healthcare and making sure that at least at a primary level we can offer healthcare to everybody. We cannot delay our conversations about how, in fact, we deal with labor relations, making sure that people work differently as technology impacts that. We can't deny the fact that ESCOM, even from an ESCOM point of view, there's no debate now. It's past the point of whether you can restructure it or not. The fact of the matter is that we have to go into a sustainable model and begin to partner with African nations to ensure we secure energy. So, to me, I am very much an optimist given the right set of circumstances. And then lastly, South Africa has got commodities within it that perhaps are going to go into a new cycle of demand. And therefore, if we do our work right and we'll be almost in a world where we'll have to work, it'll be difficult to export things, so we're going to have to deal with how do we stimulate domestic demand, how do we stimulate African demand, because certainly things like commodity pricing reset themselves in a post-COVID world. We have a great opportunity to do the right thing. So I think, to me, this is a chance to build an inclusive economy, to finally deal with the question of justice, and to really be future-focused. So I sit in that spectrum that says this could be the crisis that we've needed and I don't wish it upon anybody, but we've needed it to be able to make the tough decisions that we need to make to position South Africa for the future.
And Mmusi, I don't know if we've thought about this enough as a society, but for millions of people, I mean, I'm talking to you on a Sunday afternoon, they will have been at church in the morning or going to church this evening or in church now. It's Easter next week, the most important time of the Christian calendar. I mean, we forget sometimes what COVID-19 is doing to the lives of millions of people. It is a massive, massive disruption.
Without doubt. And I think for people of faith, this again reminds me very instinctively. I know even from our own church point of view how we've had to find new ways of doing church. But it doesn't stop people from praying for our country, and it shouldn't stop people from generosity of church. I think sometimes church is measured only on the basis of its gathering. We don't often measure church on the basis of, if quote unquote, its spreading of generosity. And I think South Africa's infrastructure around churches is such that there's nearly a church in every corner. Couldn't it be great if church communities now would take up this time and say, well, we know people in our communities who are poor, who are going to be losing their jobs, who are whatever. We could distribute food, we could help them. And I know for us as a family, we've had to make decisions, and certainly as part of One South Africa movement, we've had to ensure that there's hand sanitizer in poor communities. We've also had to now make sure that where we can feed people, we've now made a program where we can deliver food to poor communities. So this is part of the work that I think church and faith-based communities, Easter, could be known as an opportunity of the greatest act of generosity possible if church leadership got together and said, let's lead in communities, lean in effectively looking after poor South Africans.
Mmusi Maimane, nice to talk again. Been a very long time. I do appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.